Good afternoon and welcome to Monday, October 3rd and the Just Parlay show with Chris King. I'm your host, of course, Chris King, because, hey, nobody else is going to be here to do the show, right? Got a lot to unpack over the weekend as we had a big weekend in college football. Of course, a lot of NFL action yesterday. Of course, we got to look forward to the final series for Major League Baseball's regular season as the playoffs will start later this week. We've also got hockey coming up with the first games coming up later this week as well. The regular season will start in earnest next week. And we saw some NBA preseason yesterday, including the Phoenix Suns getting run over by the Adelaide 36ers of the Australian League. Interestingly enough, so a lot of good stuff happening this weekend. Hope everybody's safe now that Hurricane Ian has blown through and didn't do much of anything other than make a giant mess of things. Hopefully everyone's safe in Florida. I know on the Bucks report last night, we had people saying that it didn't hit Tampa really at all. That's why they didn't move the game for Sunday night. Maybe the Buccaneers fans wish that they didn't play at Raymond James Stadium with as poorly as they looked in that loss to Kansas City last night. In a game where, in case you missed it, on the Bucks Report pregame show, we had Scott Steen on yesterday, resident Chiefs fan, and Steen promptly faded Kansas City, saying that they would lose to the Buccaneers. So that was an interesting one for certain. Andrew, no, I did not grab the Bills in game. I didn't touch any games once the game started last night or yesterday afternoon. It was nice to see Buffalo come back. Going to unpack some things about that game along with some of the others here as we go forward in the show. I figured that they were going to have a pretty good value considering how poorly they played for most of the first half. That it was 8-1 might be seem a little bit high, but what can you do? We'll start with what happened in college football over the weekend. A lot of, I don't know if we're going to say interesting games, but we saw, number one, Georgia struggle for the majority of the game against Missouri. They were down double digits. It was 13-0 midway through the second quarter. They were down 16-6 at the half. They still trailed 19-12 after three quarters. It was 22-12 in the opening minute of the fourth. And then all of a sudden, Georgia decided they could move the ball and put it in the end zone. Meanwhile, Missouri kind of got away from what they were doing that had success early in the game because you look down the stretch, they were trying to force passes in. They still held a lead midway through the fourth. And then, there was a personal foul call on a third down that put them in a 3rd and 22 situation. Then they had to punt. It was a lousy punt on top of that. Georgia went down the field and scored. With 4 minutes to go, Missouri got the ball back one more time. They threw 3 straight incomplete passes and punted it away with 3:39 to go in the game and couldn't get a stop. So Georgia escaped with a 26-22 win. It ended up costing them in the rankings, of course, as Alabama pushed past them. So I will say this. Alabama looked mortal for stretches of that game. They jumped up big on Arkansas early. Then Bryce Young got hurt. So we had to deal with Jalen Milroe was in there when it was a 4-point game. They were backed up. It was 2nd and 11 or something like that, and or third down, and Milroe had a 77-yard run that ended up leading to a touchdown that kind of woke Alabama back up, and then Jahmyr Gibbs ran all over Arkansas in the fourth quarter en route to the win there, 49-26. But I think a lot of people are going to keep an eye out to see if Bryce Young plays this week. I know he's marked as day-to-day with that shoulder issue. But the question is Alabama the number one team in the country without Bryce Young? And the answer is probably not. We saw Ohio State steamroll Rutgers. The high point of that game was the fake punt where the punter made the call on his own, and that led to a brawl basically and war of words between Ryan Day and Greg Schiano. Don't really need to talk a whole lot about Ohio State. We know they're good. They're playing Michigan State next week. Michigan State's looked terrible the last few weeks. Probably going to be another rolling there. Michigan took down Iowa in a game where, when we talked about it on Friday, Reichel thought that Iowa was a good bet with the points. I know he got burned on that late touchdown by Corum because he had the team total for Michigan at under 26.5, and Corum punching it in. The extra point gave them 27. Clemson, they look good. They beat NC State. NC State just they had their issues. They couldn't move the ball on the ground, and that was a big issue for them because it put a lot of pressure on Devin Leary to try and carry that team. Sorry to hear about your grandmother, James. It's always rough when you lose a family member, regardless of whether it's expected or not, and it never gets any easier. But hopefully you and your family are coping with it at this difficult time, and our thoughts are with you. What else we see? USC played with Arizona State. They never really put them away. And now you have to wonder, are they going to be a little bit better against Washington State? Because you can't play around with Washington State the way that you did with Arizona State. We knew Arizona State was a bad football team coming in. We knew Arizona State was a team in disarray after firing Herm Edwards earlier this year. But, Cameron Ward has played pretty well for the Cougars this year, and they've made Jake Dickert's team look very good. You've got to figure they're just that meltdown against Oregon away from being undefeated. So will USC be able to stop Washington State, or are they going to run into issues and potentially run into an upset? Oklahoma State beat Baylor. I was surprised by that one. I thought Baylor was going to play better, considering how well Dave Aranda's defenses have played against Spencer Sanders. Sanders had 7 interceptions in the 3 games against Baylor since Aranda took over down there. But give them credit, they played well. We'll have to see if they can do that again against Texas Tech or not. Tennessee beat the bye team. I know everybody was really surprised that they beat the bye week squad 47-6. Of course, now they have to go and play at LSU, and that's going to be a tough matchup. It's always tough to play down there in the swamp and in the bayou down there. Hendon Hooker was banged up in the Florida game, so hopefully that break will help for them. Hopefully they won't get torched by the passing game because they've been terrible defending the pass this year. Ole Miss held off Kentucky, helped by the fact that Kentucky couldn't hang on to the ball. Kentucky had 2 drives late in the game that ended in fumbles in Ole Miss territory, including the one right at the end where Will Levis basically got killed because nobody blocked. And it came one play after they scored what they thought was going to be the go-ahead touchdown. Still, don't give up on Kentucky. Mark Stoops has got a good program there. And hanging tough in Oxford, they did cover the line, which was a plus. Penn State beat Northwestern in a game that nobody cared about because it was so horrible to watch. They turned it over 5 times. Northwestern, no bueno. We've talked about Northwestern all year. They beat Nebraska to start the year. I don't think they've beaten anybody since. The team that makes no sense, we talked about it way back at the start of the year when we talked about when Utah went to the swamp to play Florida at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. Reichel thought the line was a bit wonky. Turned out it was because Florida won. Since then, Utah has been destroying teams. Florida's been mediocre. makes you wonder what in the hell was going on that week. Utah comes off a 42-16 win over Oregon State. They now get to play UCLA on the road, USC at home in the next 2 weeks. Going to be an interesting run for Kyle Whittingham's team in these next couple of weeks. Oregon, I had to wait until after 2 a.m. for that game to actually end and find out that Oregon barely covered. They were a 17-point favorite. They covered by 18, beating Stanford. Stanford is not a very good football team. You watch, they turn it over far too often. They commit stupid penalties. Oregon took advantage of. They now get to go to Arizona before their bye week. Hopefully, they keep things rolling there. We talked about how about Wake Forest. Wake Forest, they gave Clemson all they wanted last week. They went on the road to play Florida State. They were an underdog by 7 points in that game. I actually liked them outright, and they ended up beating the Seminoles because Florida State couldn't stop the pass, and they couldn't run the ball. The Demon Deacons held them to 112 yards on the ground, no rushing scores. They forced Jordan Travis to try to beat them with his arm. Wake Forest, they'll go to play Army next. That'll be an interesting matchup. We saw those two teams play last year. That game ended 70-56. For some reason, I'm not seeing that many points this time around. But still a good game nonetheless. BYU, we talked about them last week when they had their issues against Utah State in a game where we thought they should have beaten the Aggies handily, considering we were talking about a Utah State team that lost by 4 touchdowns at home to Weber State. This week, BYU is going to go to Notre Dame. That's going to be an interesting matchup. Jaron Hall is going to have to play better than what they did. And how about TCU? Boy, they just made Oklahoma look absolutely pathetic. 55 points. They scored 27 in the first quarter. Max Duggan looked very good. They racked up over 600 yards of offense. Now we get to see TCU go to go to Lawrence. And of all places where you would talk about college game day, I'm sure there's about 100 campuses you could rattle off before you ever thought about saying that they were going to go to Kansas for a marquee matchup between undefeated teams as 4-0 TCU takes on 5-0 Kansas. We talked about Kansas a little bit last week. I thought they were a little bit undervalued at being a 3-point underdog at home against an Iowa State team that necessarily doesn't move the ball all that well. And they won it 14-11, despite Jalen Daniels being held in check for the most part. Andrew saying he was killing the NFL and the props until yesterday. Losing sucks. Well, losing always sucks. Unfortunately, these things happen. I do have some player props for the game tonight. DE, we'll get to those here in a little bit. Some of the numbers seem a little inflated to me. I would like to know who the guy was that came up that said, hey, Cooper Kupp's over-under for catches is 8.5. I know that he's the top receiving threat for the Rams, but come on, you got to give at least a number that's got some value to it. UCLA beat Washington. I was disappointed with the way Washington played in the first half of that game. They tried to make it interesting down the stretch. Couldn't pull it out. They got within 8 late, but they couldn't stop Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Zach Charbonnet on the run game. They'll look to bounce back this week. It was strange to see Caleb DeBauer's team go up 40 points. Talked about Kansas. It's the first time College game day is going to Lawrence ever. That just shows you how rare it is that Kansas is any good. It's the first time they've been ranked since 2009. it's going to be tough for Kansas down the stretch. You look at the rest of their schedule. They get TCU at home this week. Then they go to Oklahoma. They go to Baylor. They get Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, Texas, and Kansas State. But Lance Leopold's done a great job with that program. You talk about a team that hasn't won more than 3 games in an eternity, and they're 5-0 at this point. Good for them. Kansas State beat Texas Tech last week. So they didn't get caught up in the hangover of beating Oklahoma. They'll go and face Iowa State in Ames this weekend. Should be a good matchup there. Could be a lot of defense in that contest. Coming out of that bye, Kansas State has to go to TCU. Then they get Oklahoma State, Texas, and Baylor. So that's going to be a rough stretch for them as well. How about Syracuse? Syracuse blew out Wagner 59-0 when we were talking about the games Friday. Rachel mentioned that the schedule was rough to try and find favorite picks. And one of the ones that he leaned on was he said he contemplated taking Wagner with the points. He stayed away from it, unfortunately, and they didn't, which was good because Wagner was getting 54.5 and still would have lost. But Syracuse, have a lot tougher run here. Next couple of games, they get NC State and then go to Clemson. But hey, they're 5-0 for the first time since 1987. So good for Dino Babers and company there. Mississippi State beat Texas A&M. Can we stop talking about how Jimbo Fisher is great? They gave up 42 points against Mike Leach's squad. Mississippi State gets to face Arkansas this week. To be an interesting matchup there because obviously, Mississippi State 432 yards a game through the air. We just watched Arkansas give up 555 yards against Alabama. And boy, you talk about a team in Mississippi State we talk about these teams with brutal schedules coming up. Mississippi State, after playing Arkansas, goes to Kentucky, goes to Tuscaloosa, then comes back home to play Auburn and Georgia. So you've got 3 games against teams that are ranked in the top 10 going into this past weekend. Cincinnati's back in the rankings. They beat Tulsa. Woo, they beat Tulsa. That's all you have to say about that. LSU was a team that I had picked in my premiums this past weekend. Didn't cover. They did win. They were down early because they tried to dare the backup quarterback to beat them, and then they got shredded early in that game by Ashford. Finally figured it out in the second half, and then had chances to actually put it away and cover the line, but kept turning it over. Auburn muffed a punt. 2 plays later, LSU fumbled it back. Then they got an interception. Then they couldn't move the ball. Most disappointing teams from the weekend. Pitt lost to Georgia Tech, a team that fired their coach. Rachel's Presbyterian pick for over was no bueno. Well, I think Rachel's gone away from going with the overs with Presbyterian since Kevin Kelly left. And so, they don't go for it on every 4th down anymore. I did see the Green Bay New England game. The officials are the officials. I mean, we've seen issues in a whole bunch of games as far as that goes. Was it a catch? Probably, but how many times have we seen plays like that end up, getting overturned? It's unfortunate, but I mean, at the end of the day, we've seen these things happen over and over again. One thing I will say about the NFL lately is you look And it seemed like all of a sudden a lot of dudes got ruled out during the game with concussions. Well, you got to remember too, AJ's Gabe Davis is he is dealing with that ankle injury. He got hurt right before in practice, right before the Tennessee game, and he's still dealing with the after effects of that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if Buffalo goes and tries to find a wide receiver. I don't know if they'll try and come up with someone off the practice squad or somebody else, because, I mean, they finished yesterday with 3 receivers after McKenzie went in with the concussion and Crowder got carted off. On the plus side, you got to see Shakir, and he actually made a couple of nice plays in the second half down the stretch in that contest. Maybe they'll bring up Isaiah Hodgins off the practice squad. He's got a lot of familiar. I don't know what the status of Kumaro will be for next week. But it'll be interesting to see how things plan out going forward. No, Daniel Jones says he's good. I know he missed time yesterday, and so did Tyrod. So they basically had to go to the 37th string, wildcat quarterback sort of thing. Sad part was that the Giants still won because the Bears are terrible. And give Brian Daboll a lot of credit. He's got this team of cast-offs and nobodies. Sitting 3-1 right now. 4 games into the season, and there's a lot of people that do paraphrase the quote from Major League. They're probably sitting around saying, "I didn't think we'd win 3 games all season, much less after 4 games." A lot of injuries in the NFL this weekend. Javonte Williams gone for the year for Denver, tore knee ligaments. Cordarrelle Patterson's on injured reserve now for the Falcons. The Colts have already ruled out Shaq, don't call me Darius Leonard, for Thursday night with a concussion. Big surprise, Tua Tagovailoa ruled out for the game against the Jets this week as he's still in the concussion protocol. Don't get me started on that mess. As we saw, the independent consultant was fired over the weekend, probably the first of many dominoes to fall in that case. Dallas 3-0 without Dak Prescott. That's true. Of course, let's give credit where it's due, too. The defense has really helped out on that front. They played a Washington team that is terrible. They played the Giants, and they played Cincinnati, who beat themselves, which is an ongoing problem with the Bengals. They've been better the last couple of weeks, but can they sustain it will be the question on that front. And that brings us to today's first NFL question, and that is this. Everybody saw the way the Buffalo-Baltimore game ended in that monsoon. Question 1, in a tie game with 4 minutes to go, facing 4th and goal at the 2, do you kick the field goal or do you go for it? As we saw, John Harbaugh decided to go for it. I'm surprised they didn't call, if they were going to go for it, I'm surprised they didn't call a run play, either a designed run for Lamar Jackson or handing it off to Dobbins. But to call a straight-out pass seemed like a strange play call, given A, the weather, B, the fact that Jackson hadn't made a whole lot of plays through the air in the entire game, and C, the fact that that's not the Ravens' bread and butter. Instead, Jackson drops back. He had time. Then he got pressured and didn't get enough on the ball. It got intercepted. And that's the second time that we've seen Jackson throw a costly interception again, deep in the red zone against the Bills. We saw it in the wild card round in the 2020 playoffs when he threw one trailing 10-3 that Teron Johnson returned all the way for a score. In basically what was almost an empty stadium. There was like 7,000 fans there. But the question is, do you kick the field goal? Do you call a run play? I'd like to see what everybody's thoughts on that were, because it seemed like a strange call to me. I get the theory that Harbaugh said that if you kick a field goal or whatever, you make it a 4-down thing. But here's the thing. Even if you kick a field goal or you score a touchdown with under 4 minutes to go, it's going to be a 4-down situation anyway, because you're playing from behind. And you have the best kicker in the league. It's not the odds of Tucker somehow missing that kick from, 19, 20 yards would be slim to none. I mean, I'll take it from the perspective of being a Buffalo fan that I'll take advantage of somebody else's miscues. But it was baffling that you wouldn't kick the field goal and rely on your defense and having the benefit of the weather, knowing that, you've got to go however far down the field to try to get to a makeable field goal attempt against the clock and everything else. So that was bizarre to me. What else did we see yesterday? We saw Cleveland find a way to lose again. They lose against bad teams. Let's face it. They blew that game against the Jets. They had all kinds of opportunities yesterday against Atlanta, which, stupidly enough, I don't know how many of you guys look at the 506 maps when you're looking to see what stupid games they're going to televise in your area. But if you looked at the map yesterday, like 80% of the country got Buffalo-Baltimore on CBS. Like 3/4 of the state of South Carolina got Buffalo-Baltimore on CBS, and I got stuck with Cleveland-Atlanta. But you just look at Cleveland's opening drive, they turn it over on downs at the 4-yard line. The next drive, you fumbled it. So you basically, do nothing with your first 2 drives. Let's see. Then in the second half, you settled for a field goal after you started with the ball on the 43-yard line of the Falcons. So you were in plus territory. You went 16 yards. Again, you get into plus territory in a tie game with under 7 minutes to go, or under 4 minutes to go, and you punt it. Then the last drive, after they gave up the field goal because they couldn't make a stop, Brissett gets intercepted. I don't see why they didn't kick the field goal on the opening drive. It was 4th and 3. They called a horrible play call, trying to throw it to Njoku over there. You got gouged by backup running backs because Tyler Algier, let's face it, he may be a good back. We'll see a lot of them now that Patterson's hurt. But you let him run for 84 yards on 10 carries. You let Caleb Huntley run for 56 and a score on 10 carries. Overall, you gave up 202 yards on the ground to the Falcons. 5.8 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. Marcus Mariota only completed 7 passes in the game. You know why? Because he didn't have to throw it to anybody. Because you couldn't stop the freaking run. 202 yards against a team in Atlanta that can't run the ball to save their lives. I know Patterson had a big game against the Saints in the opener. But you look and, it's just horrible. I mean, you get gouged for that kind of yardage against a team that's not known as a run-first team. I mean, they're more run-first now with Mariota than as opposed to Matt Ryan. But still, I'll be interested to see how Algier goes going forward. I'm imagining he'll be the lead back and Huntley will be the second back / change of pace guy. But still, Cleveland continues to play down to the level of competition. I agree, JC. Harbaugh did send a message to his defense that he didn't have faith in him. And I think that's probably what set off Marcus Peters. I mean, there was that. There was the whole thing where, they wanted to let Singletary score, and give credit to Singletary and to Josh Allen down the stretch there, because they both had an opportunity to score in that last couple minutes. And instead, Singletary basically gave himself up at the 3 to keep the clock running. And Allen got just enough to get a first down without going into the end zone so they could run the clock down. Clock management was an issue against Miami last week. They didn't have those issues this week, and it panned out. But, yeah, Baltimore beat themselves, let's be honest. I have to feel bad for the Saints. They fly over there. They get a chance to tie the game and force overtime and get the old double doink off the upright and off the crossbar. Of course, if Greg Joseph had made that extra point earlier in the quarter, a field goal doesn't matter anyway. And that extra point ended up costing a lot of people because Minnesota was favored by 3.5 and they only won by 3. Elsewhere, kudos to the Jets. They rallied, they beat Pittsburgh. Kenny Pickett got to make his NFL debut. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns. Unfortunately, he threw 3 interceptions. Give the Jets credit. They drove down the field in crunch time. They rallied from a 20-10 deficit in the fourth quarter, scored twice. They took advantage of 4 Pittsburgh turnovers. Pittsburgh beat themselves. I'll be interested to see, will the Steelers start Pickett this week against Buffalo? Will they start Trubisky? That's going to be a big thing to watch going through this week. But I think we've covered most of the stuff from the weekend, so we can move on to the good stuff. First, we'll do our usual housekeeping. Our sponsor, Caesar Sportsbook, has a great deal for first-time users. You can get up to $1,250 in free bet insurance. Download the app today. Of course, that means if you put money into Caesars and your first bet loses, they'll make it right by giving you money to bet again. So it's basically a no-lose situation. As always, check your state's age limits. Like Steen would tell you, in Wyoming and New Hampshire, we think that's 11, but always check that. And as we always say, bet responsibly. And just in case you can't get enough of the picks that we talk about here on the show, if you want to get my premium bets, you can check the link in the show box, because there's even more picks down there that people don't know about. If you look at the Just Parlays tab, I send out 7 different parlays every day. The best bets for individual games, there's usually between 3 and 5 of those in those packages. Had a good weekend this weekend. 3-0 straight up on college football, 3-0 straight up on the pros, 2-1 against the spread in both of those games. Thanks, Minnesota, and thanks, LSU, for not playing for the first half of that game against Auburn. But, hey, they came back to win. That's what matters. And, of course, be sure that you hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell, and that way you'll never miss our show. But if you haven't been living under a rock, we're on from 2 p.m. Eastern, Monday to Friday. And also check out the Winners and Whiners YouTube channel for free picks every day from guys like Rachel and Steen and Dave Delano and Mason Foles and all those guys. And also check out the website where we cover pretty much everything. So with that, we can move on to today. Remember, it's the last regular season series for everybody. Everybody's playing today. It's weird to see a Monday where you've got 15 games on the schedule. Of course, only a handful mean, jack squat. And then we've got Monday Night Football too. So let's move on to, of course, 2 for the money. I'm going to go with the Angels over the A's tonight. It's Adrian Martinez, not the Kansas State quarterback, but a crappy pitcher for the A's. with his ERA of 37.5. It's not really that high, but you get what I mean. He's going against Patrick Sandoval of the Angels. Martinez this year, since he came up, has been awful. He's 4-6, but his earned run average 6.08. He's given up 13 home runs in 53 and a third innings. He's thrown 6 wild pitches. And if that's not enough for you, in his last 3 starts, he's 0-2 with a 7.36 earned run average, a 1.36 whip, over 14 and 2/3. Pitching at the Ring Central Coliseum, which is supposed to be a pitcher's ballpark. He's 2-2. His ERA is 6.94. His whip is 1.76 in 23 and a third frames. Meanwhile, you look at Sandoval and you're like, well, what's so great about this guy? Well, to be honest, nothing, but you look at, and he's got a 3.03 earned run average. And it makes you wonder, why is he only 6-9? If the Angels would pitch or would score a little bit more when he's on the mound, or not have their bullpen blow games, because you're looking at his last 3 starts, he gave up 1 run in 5 innings against the Tigers in a game that they went on to lose 5-4. He gave up 2 runs in 5 1/3 against Cleveland in a game they went on to lose 5-3. He did beat the A's in his last start, 3 runs in 5 1/3. They won 4-3 in that one. But, Sandoval, he's pitched well. And, we're talking about an Oakland team that doesn't hit well. They hit terribly at home. Hard to have any faith in the A's as they finish out this dismal season. But what do you expect? It's Oakland. Cleveland over Kansas City. We know the Guardians are going to play whoever the third wild card is in the opening round of the playoffs. Pitching matchup there, Zach Greinke going against Tristan McKenzie. Greinke, just to show you how far he's fallen as far as being a guy that can strike guys out, his strikeout number is 2.5 at -110 for the over. But you look at his last few starts, last 5 starts, he struck out 2, 2, 1, 3, and 2. On the plus side, he's giving you a little bit of length lately, so if you wanted to potentially go that route with him as a prop, over 15.5 outs, so 5 1/3 innings, plus 115. He went 6 against Cleveland in his last start against them, went 7 in his last start overall, which came against the Tigers last week. And he's averaging 5 1/3 in his last 10 outings, so that's something you could potentially chase. I just like McKenzie better. Let's face it. Cleveland's won his last 5 starts. He's only 2-0 in that stretch. But you look, he gave up 3 runs, 2 earned, and 5 2/3 against the Royals on September 5th. Then he went 7 scoreless against the Twins. Then he gave up 3 runs on 7 hits and 7 innings against the Twins. 2 runs on 6 hits and 8, while striking out 13 against the White Sox. And he went 6 innings, gave 1 run, 3 hits, struck out 6 against Tampa Bay in his last outing in a game that the Guardians won in 10. One of these years I'll get past the fact that they're not the Indians anymore, but it's so ingrained. It's not like we're calling them the Cleveland Spiders. The Braves and the Marlins. Let's face it, the Marlins going nowhere. The Braves moved into first place in the NL East over the weekend as they swept the Mets. Apparently even Elton John was happy about that, which was interesting to see. Pitching matchup there, Bryce Elder going against Jesus Luzardo. I'm going to be honest, it could be Pablo Lopez, it could be Alcantara going for the Marlins here, and I still wouldn't like them because Miami doesn't score any runs. By the way, the Marlins have lost Luzardo's last 9 starts dating back to August 13th. That includes a 5-2 loss to the Braves that day where he gave 4 runs on 7 hits in 5 innings of a 5-2 defeat. It's not that Luzardo's pitched badly. It's the fact that Miami doesn't score any runs. Like I said, in those 9 starts, Miami has scored a total of 23 runs. When you're averaging less than 3 a game for a guy, it's tough for him to put anything in the win column. And I don't see that working for Luzardo here. You look at Elder. He's only got 1 win in his last 5, but they've won 3 of the 5. And he left with a lead in one of those other starts where he gave up 1 run in 5 2/3 against the Nationals, only to lose 3-2. He's coming off a complete game shutout in his last start. Blanked Washington, gave up 6 hits, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts. And in his 2 starts against the Marlins this year, well, his 2 starts since coming back up, because he did make a start against them back in April. But his 2 starts, August 14th, he went against them, 1 run, 3 hits, 3 walks, 10 strikeouts, and 7, and a 3-1 win. No runs, 2 hits, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts on September 3rd, and a 2-1 Braves victory. I just don't trust Miami to hit. Matthew said the Braves can also clinch the division with a win. Yeah, the Mets kind of shot themselves in the foot over the weekend. All they had to do was win at least one of the 3, and they would have won the tiebreaker, which would have benefited them should we have ended up with those teams being even. But no such luck, as they lined up their premier arms and couldn't get things done. In case you're wondering, the Mets heavy favorites tonight against the Nationals. Corey Abbott going for Washington against Cookie Carrasco. But when you put DeGrom and Scherzer and Bassett out there, you like your chance of winning at least 1. Instead, they only scored 7 runs in the 3 games. And it's going to put the Mets in a tough situation, because now they'll have to play San Diego more than likely in the first round of the playoffs, provided Atlanta not falling flat on their face here down the stretch, and the Mets finding a way to jump back in front. But what can you say about the Mets? Gio says he's got the Mariners on the money line, the Braves on the money line, and the Mets on the run line. Yeah, the Mets, the Nats have not been great when Abbott pitches. Let's face it, he's dealing with lack of support, really, when you get right down to it. You look at Abbott lately, he's lost his last 2, gave up 9 runs, 8 earned in 9 innings against the Braves in those 2 games. As far as starts, 0-3, 0-4, 0-5, 0-6, 0-7. Yeah, they won. The one start that the Nationals won that Abbott had was on August 2nd. That was DeGrom's return from the IL. And he went 5 innings, didn't get a decision. No runs, 2 hits, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts, and a 5-1 Nationals win. But yeah, they've dropped his last 7 starts. He's not very good. The Mets have to be motivated at this point, because they know that they can't afford to lose any games to a team like Washington. You'd have to think that they can beat up on the Nationals, who kind of rolled over in the last couple of games against Philadelphia after they won the opening game of that doubleheader Saturday. They then proceeded to get outscored 16-3 in the last 2 games of that set. On the plus side, I guess if you're a Washington fan, you could say, well, Patrick Corbin won't get to 20 losses, but that's because you skipped him a couple times in the rotation down the stretch. So Mike Maroth's status as being the last 20-game loser in Major League history seems intact for another year. No, I don't hate it. I think, like we said, Washington rolled over and died over the weekend. The Mets know they have to score some runs. They're pretty prolific offensively at Citi Field. the question is, will Carrasco keep them in check? And we're talking about a Washington team that comes into today ranked 26th in the majors and runs per game at 367. They're slightly better on the road at 387, but that's still in the bottom third of the league. The Mets are sixth. They average 4.72 runs a game. 4.55 at Citi Field, but you look at the season series between those teams, and I'm pretty sure it's been heavily weighted in favor of the Mets. I'm just going to pull it up here real quick. And it shows us that on the season, the Mets are 11-5 against Washington, but in those 16 games, they've outscored them 84-54. So you're talking about a 30-run differential in 16 games. So they've outscored them by almost 2 a game overall over the course of the season. Then we got Tampa Bay over Boston. This is another game where, you could probably go with the run line factor on them. Boston, we watched get outscored 25-3 over the weekend by Toronto. They've lost 9 of their last 12. They're going to finish last in the AL East. Rich Hill is on the mound for the Red Sox. Tyler Glasnow is going to get the start for Tampa Bay. The Rays have beat the crap out of Boston all season long. They've won 12 of the first 16 meetings between these teams by outscoring them by a combined margin of 82-54 in those meetings. So tough to have a lot of faith in a Boston team that, gave up on the season a month ago. Hill, he's your junk ball express at 41, 42, whatever he is. And Tampa Bay's had Boston's number. You look at the way things have gone this season. They swept them at the Trop back in early September. In the most recent series, back when Boston might have still had a pulse. Just don't trust the Red Sox. I think Tampa Bay should dispatch them rather easily in that one. And that takes us to 4 for the show. There's at least one prop up there, Tyler Higbee. If you want to chase the touchdown prop with Higbee, not a bad bet either. He's got 3 touchdowns in his last 2 contests against the 49ers. I thought about Cooper Kupp as far as the receptions, but like I said, 8.5 is a pretty high number for a guy who only caught 4 balls last week. I also like Stafford for passing yards. It's actually come down. It was 252 yesterday. It's 248.5 now. I think he'll probably go for 265 or 270. If you wanted to go on the Jimmy Garoppolo side, I don't expect Garoppolo to be a major factor. I'd look at under 19.5 completions for him. He was, if you look at some of the numbers for Garoppolo when it comes down to playing against the Rams, he wasn't great in the NFC title game last year. He's also got to deal without Trent Williams blocking on his blind side against the Rams team that likes to blitz. Plus, you've got Aaron Donald in there. You have to wonder how much they're going to trust Garoppolo to throw the ball as opposed to trying to hand it off. And granted, Jeff Wilson Jr., Mr. Fumbleitis there, not a big factor either. But Garoppolo, you look at his numbers, his expected completion rate is 5.4% worse than his actual completion percentage. He was 16 of 30 against the Rams in the NFC title game last year. He stayed under 19.5 completions in 12 of his last 19 starts. The 49ers are dead last in plays per second, so they run at a snail's pace, basically. And they run the ball at the 3rd highest rate in the league. So I don't trust Garoppolo to throw a ton here. If you want to deal with Deebo Samuel, under 30.5 rushing yards, because I don't think he's going to get the ball a ton on the ground because he's only seeing like 4 to 6 carries a game until they start making him more of a feature in the run game as opposed to trying to give it to Wilson until Elijah Mitchell comes back. I don't see him busting out a big run that's going to push him over that number. A couple other ones if you wanted to look at. I'd like to see them get more George Kittle more involved for the 49ers because, he's been such a valuable safety valve. I know he just came back last week, but still. And like I said, on the Higbee touchdown prop, he's at what? Let's see. Just pulling up my sheet here. His anytime touchdown number on BetMGM is plus 200. So, like I said, he's got 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games against San Francisco. And with, Van Jefferson still out, I don't really trust Skowronek. They're going to try to double or shadow Cup to take him out of the equation. You could chase Allen Robinson if you wanted to. He's just been so inconsistent in the early going. I know that Bill said that, the Cup touchdown is an autoplay. And, I could see that. At least I think it was Bill. Yeah. And when there's a public dog like the Rams, you stay away or bet the opponent. I don't trust the 49ers. In this case, I like the better team. I think the Rams are the better team right now. They're better defensively. Without Williams, without Mitchell, the 49ers have struggled offensively. They don't beat you deep. They're very methodical. San Francisco has to grind out possessions, and it's tough to go 9, 12, 13, 14 plays without something screwing up. And that's basically what San Francisco does. They don't get those big chunk plays. Yeah, Andrew, like I said, I'd like to see them get Kittle involved. I think his prop for receptions is the same as Higbee's at 4.5. Let me just double check. 4.5. He's at plus 125 as opposed to the plus 100 Higbee's at. For a touchdown prop, he's at plus 180, so he's right ahead of Higbee as far as that goes on BetMGM's chart. Garoppolo runs through the end zone, minus 1,000. If it was Dan Orlovsky, he'd probably take that bet easy, Bill. But I'm going to take the Rams. If you want to take the point, you can. I don't expect it to be a 1 or a 2 point game. So, like Steve always says, if it's under 3, you're better off just playing the money line in a situation like that. Yes, the Bills have always been my team going back to the years when they were 2-14 in the mid 80s. And, the highlight of the year was Greg Bell running for an 80-yard touchdown to beat the Cowboys. So I remember the days before Jim Kelly came to town. I remember the days when Jim Kelly spurned Buffalo to go play in the USFL with the Gamblers. Growing up there, you learn to follow those teams. I remember OJ, Joe Ferguson, the Electric Company, all that stuff. Those were the days of, I remember when they tore down the goalposts when they beat Miami after losing throughout the 70s. I remember Joe Delano kicking a field goal in overtime in the Orange Bowl to win 38-35. I remember them beating the Jets in the wild card round with Bill Simpson picking off Richard Todd. A lot of lean years, but a true fan doesn't just bounce around from team to team just because of the fact that the team doesn't play well. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves with sports fans is, my brother was that way for the longest time. He went and bounced from San Francisco when Montana was there, and then he liked Buffalo, and then he went on to somebody else. And he was the same way with hockey. He liked the Red Wings when Detroit was good in the 90s, and then he'd bounce somewhere else. And that's irritating to me because, if you're a fan of a team, you should be a fan of a team regardless of how well or how poorly they play. Yeah, you get it, Kevin, with the Jets with, Namath and Snell and Maynard and Weeb Eubank and everybody else. And then, you had the Ken O'Brien, Wesley Walker, Al Toon years with Joe Walton. And, then you had to go through the butt fumble and, everything else. But, everything in sports is cyclical. It's just a matter of whether you ride the waves or not. And some people do and some people don't. I'm going to take the Cubs over the Reds. Hayden Wesneski going as Hunter Green. I will say this about Hunter Green. He's done a good job lately of keeping the ball in the park. Unfortunately, the Reds haven't been good. The Cubs have won 7 straight. They swept the Reds over the weekend. I know you're an Arizona fan, James. I'm talking about in general. And back in the days of Stump Mitchell and J.T. Smith and Roy Green, and Neil Lomax and all those guys when they were the St. Louis Cardinals, the Cardinals were a decent football team. I was in the Tucson area when Jake Plummer was there, and they made the playoffs in '98 with Rob Moore and all those guys. And I know how exciting of a time it was at that point for the area because they weren't used to seeing a winning team there. Because when they moved to Arizona, you had Tom Tupa and Johnny Johnson and all those guys. And that's a pretty accurate representation of what being a true sports fan is, James. It's a very good analogy. Finally, the Blue Jays over the Orioles. The Blue Jays want to win to make sure they can lock down the top seed and home field advantage throughout the wild card round. Baltimore, I give the Orioles credit. They'll finish at least 500. So it's a big step forward for them. But Toronto has something to play for here. I think they'll get the better of the Orioles. Of course, you could always, deal with Ryan Mountcastle to if you want to ride an Orioles prop because he's beat the crap out of Toronto pitching all season long. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Let me just pull that up real quick because I didn't put Mountcastle on my props for some reason. I was thinking of something, and then got crossed up. Mountcastle splits against the Blue Jays this year. Hitting .298, he's 17 for 57, 6 doubles, 5 home runs, 17 RBIs, an OPS of 1022. So some good numbers for Mountcastle against the Blue Jays. He's facing Barrios. He hits .274 at home. If you wanted to chase a prop with him, I wouldn't be adverse to that either. That takes us to the shot in the dark. Got some fun stuff on here today. We're going to go with Juan Soto over 1.5 total bases. The Padres facing probably a bullpen day for the Giants. John Brebbia getting another, quote, start where he'll go an inning or maybe an inning and a third. He'll face Joe Musgrove. Soto, he's been better of late. Had a good series over the weekend. Let me just pull up his recent information here, provided it shows up anywhere. There we go. Soto has had 8 total bases in his 3 games against the White Sox. 4 hits in that series. He singled twice yesterday. He doubled on Friday, homered on Saturday. Getting a guy like that at plus money, sure, he might walk a bunch of times, but having the ability to do some damage is always a plus. Real Muto, I thought about Harper. I thought about Hoskins. I thought about Schwarber. But Real Muto has probably been the hottest hitter for the Phillies of late. They're playing Houston. Houston, I don't think they're going to overload Lance McCullers in this one. I think you'll see a lot of bullpen arms because the Astros have nothing to play for at this point. They've already got the top record in the American League. They're not going to catch the Dodgers for the best record in the majors. Real Muto, he had 2 hits Friday, had 2 hits in the game he played on Saturday. He had a homer yesterday. And he's been surprising for a catcher because he's got 21 steals without being caught. So, I mean, he's one of those guys that's really impressed. 26 doubles, 5 triples, 22 homers, and then, like I said, 21 steals. It's a lot for a catcher. Matt Olson, you talk about a guy that's been on a roll of late. Olson has been smacking around some people because – Atlanta, they've got stuff to play for. So you're going to see the Acuñas and the Swansons and the Austin Rileys and all those guys because they want to lock this up. Olson, in his last 4 games, he's homered in all 4. He's homered in 5 of his last 6. He's got 19 total bases in his last 4 games, 25 in his last 6 games. If you want to go with the home run prop again at Lone Depot Park, he's going about plus 450. But, the total base prop, giving him that kind of number at between plus 140 and 145 with the role he's been on, and even facing Luzardo, it's a good number. Trout, I don't think we have to talk a whole lot about. We know what Mike Trout brings to the table. We talked about how bad Martinez has been for the A's. But just for the sake of putting it out there, Trout, his last 4 games, total of 15 total bases. He homered yesterday against the Rangers. Had 3 hits yesterday. Had 2 hits on Friday night. He took Saturday off. I don't blame him. He averages 2.32 total bases a game. He's got 29 total bases in his last 10. And we talked about how the A's suck, so there's that too. The Rangers over the Yankees. I know people are like, well, why are you going to take the Rangers over the Yankees? Well, the Yankees don't have anything to play for. If Aaron Boone is smart, he's not going to play all of his starters because the last thing he needs is for somebody to get hurt here in the last couple of games of the season. The Rangers started Martin Perez, their best starter. And Texas wants to finish the season strong. I'll take a flyer on them here with the Yankees having nothing to play for. Then we get to the strikeout props. Berrios over 4.5 is plus 106. If you want to see him get 6 strikeouts, plus 230. Baltimore is a team that'll chase some pitches. And, Berrios is capable of striking guys out as long as he's not, serving up homers. So there's some value to that. Berrios struck out 7 Yankees in his last start. So he's got that going for him as well. We've got Sandoval. We talked about the A's can't hit. And Sandoval's done a decent job of striking hitters out. If he gets a 7 Ks plus 146, if he gets the 8 plus 290. Elder, we talked about, he's facing a punchless Marlins lineup that couldn't hit a wiffle ball. Over 6 Ks is plus 110, over 7 plus 230. Kirby and the Mariners, they're facing the Tigers. Talk about a team that has no punch in their lineup. Over 7Ks plus 140. Over 8 is 265. And Glass now, he may not go a ton of innings in this game because only his second starts is coming off the shelf. But let's face it, this is a Boston team that's mailed it in. And you're looking, Glass now was pretty sharp against Cleveland in his first start. He threw 50 pitches, 1 run, 2 hits, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts in 3 innings. I think you'll probably get 4, maybe 5 out of him here. I don't have a ton of faith in Boston. Over 6Ks plus 124, over 7 plus 240. If you play all of those on the money line, it would return 406, 848.91 on $100. So pretty nice payday. If you were crazy and bet the Rangers on the run line, and that hit along with everything else, $623,311.10 on 100. And if you just went with the alternative K props, which is Barrios over 5.5, Sandoval over 7.5, Elder over 6.5, Kirby over 7.5, and Glasnow over 6.5, $52,606.51 on a hundo. All in all, not a bad set of numbers, to say the least. So that'll do it for today's show. Hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. We can talk about what happened on Monday Night Football. We can talk about the penultimate day of the regular season in Major League Baseball, and we'll deal with any other questions and things you guys want to talk about as we head into the middle of the week. Of course, we'll have that college football game on Wednesday with SMU facing Central Florida. But that will do it for the Monday edition of Just Parlays with Chris King. Glad you all were aboard. We'll see you again tomorrow. Enjoy your afternoon, and we will catch you tomorrow. Have a good one.